Welcome everyone to the Rotary and Malaria Partners webinar series. And for our webinar today, Magnifying Malaria, looking at microscopy in Ghana. We want to thank you all for joining us. My name is Ariel Delaney, Executive Administrative Consultant with Rotary and Malaria Partners. We are happy to host this webinar as part of our regular series, which aims to engage both Rotarians and the malaria prevention community on unique topics that we make accessible for everyone. The mission of Rotary and Malaria Partners is to ignite an international Rotarian campaign for the global eradication of malaria. For today's webinar, we are looking at magnifying malaria, looking at microscopy in Ghana. Our featured speaker today is RMP board member Jim Mulry. Jim is the head of diagnostics for the Global Health Initiative for Merck, Germany. His specialty is introducing new medical technologies into emerging economies. I'll now hand over to Jim and we'll hear more about the Ghana Microscopy Project.
Today, I want to talk to you about malaria. I'm going to explain a little bit about the Global Health Institute that I'm a member of. I'm going to explain the Ghana Microscopy Project, the importance of microscopy, and then I'm going to talk about two other projects that we have going that are malaria related. One is the development of a device to test for counterfeit drugs, and the other project is the tracking of vivax, which is a genesis of mosquitoes that I'll go into detail to explain later. I'm part of the Merck Global Health Institute. Predominantly, we work throughout the world, but most of our work is conducted in sub-Saharan Africa. We are a team of research scientists that are dedicated to helping the most vulnerable populations, by that I mean women and children, to combat infectious diseases. It's a diverse group. We're made up of professionals that develop new pharmaceuticals, new diagnostics, new medical devices, and we all work together to enhance healthcare delivery in developing countries. We have limited resources, so we concentrate on three areas. At this time, they happen to be schistosomiasis, malaria, and antimicrobial resistance. Currently, our team is active in 15 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So we want to strengthen healthcare systems by developing technological solutions, adding to the capacity of the healthcare system. We want to attack a full range of health challenges. We try to predict and be aware of threats like COVID-19 that everybody's going through. We build on partnerships working effectively together. We foster sustainable and resilient systems. By sustainable, I mean we don't just go in and make donations or make a change in one product or so. We really are looking for long-term solutions, make the technologists and the doctors and the nurses, the healthcare delivery people better. We try to expand the reach every year of the global network that we compete in, and we try and show a way to make all this effort sustainable. So our operation model is we look into new technologies, both inside of Merck. Merck is a company based in Darmstadt, Germany. It's not to be confused with Merck Sharp and Dohme. At one time, Merck Sharp and Dohme was part of Merck. During the Treaty of Versailles back in 1919, after World War I, America was not interested in taking on new colonies, but we needed jobs. Merck took part of their business, the pharmaceutical business, and sent it over to America to become Merck Sharp and Dohme. We're with the traditional Merck. The Merck family has been in business for over 400 years. They started as a pharmaceutical compound company in Darmstadt, Germany, and we're still in Darmstadt today. We employ about 100,000 employees, and we're active in 170 countries around the world. When we look at trying to solve a problem like infectious diseases, we look at new technologies, both inside and outside of Merck. We work with all sorts of people to get our projects going in the field. Sometimes it's the World Health Organization, sometimes it's NGOs, sometimes we pull a product from Merck, sometimes we go and find outside products or outside research. But it's all healthcare related, and it's all to combat infectious disease. Currently, this is our operating portfolio. Essentially, we're developing a product until we have the product approved. It always has a numeral and a name, and this is M5717. But basically, we're developing two new pediatric formulations for anti-malarial drugs. Right now, we're just coming out of phase 1 and entering into phase 2. We have a device I'll talk to you about today that was co-developed with Boston University, and it's an anti-counterfeit drug technology called PharmaChk. IR3535 is a compound that is used to make insect repellent. It is the only one available on the market today. It's DEET-free. DEET is a chemical that causes, it's a carcinogen, and it's dangerous for women and children. You know the product here in the United States as bullfrog, and it's available. We now have a manufacturing facility that we built in Ghana that is making the insect repellent for the African market. We recently tested the product in Uganda, working with Makerere University. We are working on a new project, and it's microscopy. And Ghana is the first country where we're doing this. And I'll get into microscopy detail in a little bit. But essentially, we're teaching healthcare workers to use microscopy. Big problem is that patients show up at the ER or in the clinics and they have a fever, and it's very difficult for the healthcare worker to figure out what they're dealing with. So the reference methodology is microscopy. Sometimes you can have different diseases and still have the same symptoms. For instance, dengue fever has the same symptoms as malaria, a viral infection, bacterial infection, an allergic reaction. We were looking for an effective and durable way to combat this, and that's why we're getting into microscopy. We also work in malaria. There's a genesis that's from Asia of mosquitoes called the vivax. Another genesis native to Africa called falciparum. If you mix the medicines up and patients have a glucose disorder called G6PD, you could cause blood clots to form, which could lead to strokes or heart attacks. And so we have all these projects that we're working on, and this is the current malaria portfolio. We have separate portfolios for antimicrobial resistance and schistosomiasis. I call it M squared, malaria and microscopy. Some people call it magnifying malaria. Got started in Ghana. We attended World Malaria Day back in 2018. Malaria is a very serious subject. According to the World Health Organization, about 60,000 children die in sub-Saharan Africa every year. As far as HIV, AIDS patients in Africa, malaria is the #1 killer. There's numerous diagnostic tests out there for malaria, but they're not sensitive and they don't tell you much about morphology, and some of them aren't even accurate. And so we chose microscopy for this project because of its affordability, its portability, its multiple diagnostic uses, and they're durable. I'm 66 years old, and I still have the microscope that I was trained on in college. Microscopy is a reference method. That means that it's the base method of all science. And in hematology, the microscope is used as the reference method to examine blood cells. Medical laboratory scientists are trained in cell morphology and distinguishing characteristics of the cells found in human blood. Now, when you go to the hospital, especially here in the United States, most hospitals have automated hematology instruments that can differentiate the blood cells, but they still keep a scope in every lab because once the instruments alert them to something wrong, they need to make a slide immediately and see what's going on. And there's 3 classifications of blood cells. There's white blood cells, they're called leukocytes, red blood cells called erythrocytes, platelets, which are the cells that are clotting, so that if you have a cut, they're the cells that come up and close the leakage of blood. Malaria is a parasite. It comes from 5 different mosquitoes. It infects red blood cells. The red blood cells carry hemoglobin and oxygen to muscle tissue, and this bug, when it gets inside you from a mosquito bite, loves to go after the hemoglobin in red blood cells, causing anemia. This is a picture here. You can see the red blood cells, and this is on a radio microscope. And this is a patient that's very far along with malaria. But that yellow is all the parasite taking up the cells, and you can see how the red cells become malformed. Since they're not carrying enough hemoglobin, you end up with a hemoglobinopathy, anemia. When we do a project, like any of the projects that we take on here at the Merck Global Health Institute, we look for local sponsorship on the ground, fundraising partners. In this case, the Rotary is our partner here funding the microscopy project. We need an educational institute to train the medical technologists how to use the scope, teach them all the morphology of cells. We want a project that's sustainable. And by sustainable, it means Merck wants to recoup some of their investment. So we sell them hematology stains and microscope slides that we've been making since 1836. There's a lot of licensing we have to do. We have to get the products approved for clinical use by the Ghana FDA. We need ground support to follow up on the technologists after they've been trained. We need to review the results of this program, and then our plan is to expand. So this project, and these are red blood cells that you would normally see under a microscope, like the ones we intend to donate into Ghana. Those little dots that you see are the black, darker dots in the picture are malaria inside the red cells. We have a budget this year to train 30 medical technologists. It's a $70,000 budget. It covers the techs, the microscopy stations, the transportation, the lodging, and the instruction, as well as the building use. Of this, $22,000 is being raised from the Rotary. Plan is to continue training 40 students in 2021 and 30 students in 2022. Once these students are trained, they basically have a skill that enhances the healthcare for life. They'll know about anemia. They'll know how to use white blood cell differentials to identify an allergic reaction. They'll learn how to use lymphocytes to identify a viral reaction. They'll look at granulocytes to look at a bacterial reaction. So they'll get a lot of good training out of this, and this will help on the front line and impact the healthcare situation there in Ghana, because they'll figure out what's going on with the patient the first time. Every student there will receive a blood cell atlas, a new microscope, and complete microscopy station for use in the clinics and the hospitals. The Ghana Health Services, that's what GHS stands for. Basically, once the class is over, each new technologist be assigned with an experienced medical technologist, and they'll spend a month internship, QC in the work, quality control, making sure that everything that they learned in the school, how to make blood slides, the morphology, how to look at the scope and read the scope. All this will be done, how to count cells. This will all be done with a follow-up. Once they're ready, they'll be released into new clinics. This is where one of the sponsors comes in. This is an NGO called Infanta. And Infanta was founded by Ghana's First Lady, an organization that raises money through the Society of the Performing Arts. Ballet, the symphony, and the opera there in Accra all donate proceeds to build new clinics and hospitals in areas where there is an urgent need. Infanta helps us out like any NGO in a project. They help with lobbying efforts. They help us with the media, and they help us with contacts within the government. And so these are the ladies of Infanta in Accra. Noguchi Memorial Medical Center is where we're going to be doing the training. The picture you're looking at here is a brand new building donated by Mr. Honda of Honda Motors, and it's the laboratory science building at the Noguchi Memorial Medical Research Center. Dr. Noguchi was a famous scientist from Japan. There's a huge Japanese presence in Ghana, and they made this donation. They donated the entire hospital. It's part of the University of Ghana, and professors from the University of Ghana will be doing the instruction with the students one-on-one, 2-week intervals. Each class will have 10 students. There'll be 3 classes this year. Everything that they do and train is going to be monitored by the Malaria Control Program of the Ghana Health Services. And essentially, they're going to make sure that everything's done to World Health standards. Ghana Health Services is going to employ all the medical technologists that we train. Ghana Health Services is basically a universal health delivery system in the country of Ghana. They control up to about 1,200 hospitals, thousands of clinics throughout the country. They staff all the clinics and hospitals built by Infanta. Part of their organization is the National Malaria Control Program, and basically they do everything that a patient needs they can do for malaria patients throughout Ghana. One of the key contacts there is Dr. William Mills Papo, and he's the Director of Laboratory Services, and we've been working closely with him on the ground to make this happen. Merck has made a huge investment into this project. Last June, they hired Kingsley Dompre, and he's the manager for Ghana for Merck, and this is his primary project. His goal is to introduce the Merck stains and slides into the Ghana health system. He'll also be meeting a lot of the technologists, and he's setting up distribution for our products there in Ghana. He's monitoring our submission to the Ghana FDA of the stains and slides for FDA approval for clinical use. And Merck Life Sciences loaned a lot of expertise to make this happen: marketing, legal, regulatory, management from all the different divisions of Merck is in support of this project. Support on the ground is imperative. There's two people here that have been helping us immensely. Salah Sweet is a board member with the Rotary Malaria Partners, and Dr. Kome is a good friend of hers, but she's also part of Ghana Health Services, and she's going to help monitor the students once they come out of school and get placed into the Ghana Health Services. She'll work with Dr. Ofori, the primary instructor at Noguchi, to make sure everything meets use standards. Salah has been going back and forth to Ghana for several years. She has all sorts of contacts with the Rotary. There's 5 chapters of the Rotary there in Accra, and Dr. Kome are making certain the microscope stations that we put in go into the places of the greatest needs. She's also helping us generate local support from the Rotary there in Accra. This is a picture of the brand new Ghana FDA building. We have to submit all medical products to the Ghana FDA for licensing, and we are in the process of doing that. Merck Regulatory did a lot of work putting together the application, and Merck Marketing contributed $1,200 for the application fee. The product has been shipped, all the stains, I think there was 9 of them, and the slides, and they're now with the Ghana Health Services, and they're beginning to do the submission for the Ghana FDA. Dr. Anang from Noguchi is part of the Ghana FDA, and he has gotten the FDA there to fast track the product. We should have an approval within 60 to 90 days. And once we get the product licensing, then we can begin introducing the product into the Ghana Health Services. This is the administrative team. To my left there in the pink shirt is Dr. Anang. He's the director of the Noguchi Memorial Medical Research Center. To his left is Dr. Ampofo, who heads up the COVID-19 program there, is the Dean of Immunology there at the university. To my right is Dr. Ofori, and he's responsible for the training that'll take place there. Our plan is to complete 3 classes this year, get the scientists out there, do a review of how it's working and what the impact is. It's going to be a big impact in 2 ways. It's going to impact the patients because they'll have a more accurate response up front. But also, we feel that once they learn microscopy, these medical technologists will teach other medical technologists throughout their healthcare system how to use the microscope. As things evolve and as new technologies come in, it's always important to know how to use the reference technology, particularly in Africa, where anything that runs on electricity can be suspect. I was noticing the lights in one laboratory there were waves going through the light. Electricity can be up and down in these countries. And so it's good to be able to have an instrument that can run on batteries, but at the same time use electricity. And that's the design of the microscopes that we've chosen. I wanted to stress the importance of the Rotary and Malaria Partners and Rotary involvement. You know, it's important that we expand this to the Rotary on the ground, because we don't want the skills that we're training. It's very expensive to do this, to diminish in the medical technologists. The Rotary has expertise in the fight against malaria. They have many community connections, and they are very involved with universities, government, and NGOs, as well as business. And I think that they can help us expand this education in microscopy to developing countries. This is me and my wife. We went to a fundraiser a few years ago for Pilgrim as guests of the Rotary. So in expansion, we've been talking about where to go next if we're successful in Ghana. And it looks like Uganda. I know that the RMP has a nominal relationship with Pilgrim, and Pilgrim is active there in Ghana. From the Merck side, we've done a lot of work with Rotary. We have a life science representative on the ground there. We're connected with the CDC Africa. If everything works out, we should begin planning our next step, which is an expansion into Uganda. I'm going to talk about the two other malaria projects in our portfolio. The first one is called PharmaChk. PharmaChk is a device that is being developed at Boston University. It's being funded by Merck, and it's designed to test for counterfeit drugs, but also drugs that are diluted or drugs that are degraded. Counterfeit medicine is a huge problem. It's bigger than I thought I could ever imagine until I talk to people at Interpol. It's something that healthcare systems are fighting. The average African family in sub-Saharan Africa subsists on an income of less than $200 a year. Imagine if one of their children gets sick and they go to the store and they see two different medicines in the same wrapper. One is twice as expensive as another. Obviously, they're going to try and go with the more affordable medicine. And then they get frustrated because either it didn't work or it wasn't tested. And it's a major issue. This is all from Interpol. This is actually one of their slides, but they were saying that they estimate anywhere in any given country, 10% to 30% of the drugs on the market are counterfeit. And they said it's a minimum of impact of $200 billion worldwide worth annually. They said that in sub-Saharan Africa, about 1 in 5 drugs are counterfeit. And there's a million people that die every year because of counterfeit drugs worldwide. People lose faith in their healthcare system. They lose faith in their pharmacists and their doctors. It is more than just a medical problem. It becomes also a social problem. It can endanger health, prolong illness, and even kill. When a drug is diluted, it's easy for a microbe to overcome it, and then you have a drug-resistant microbe in your system. And that can cause sepsis. Sepsis is an infection that kills you because the drugs don't work. To make healthcare sustainable, we need to address this. And this slide came from the World Health Organization. It's a global issue. It's even a problem here in the United States. These are the countries throughout the globe that have reported falsified medical products, but particularly it's impacting the Southern Hemisphere. The sad thing is, and with us all in malaria and working towards malaria, the drug that is most often counterfeited is the malaria medicines. The other one, and this has come up big with COVID-19, is antibiotics. These two, more than anything else, get counterfeited, and the impact is just terrible. Multiple factors lead to substandard or falsified medicines. There's the high cost of medicine. The pharmaceutical developers have to pay for research, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, but in other places. The pharmacists lack a lot of training. Unlike the United States, you can get just about any drug in many of these countries just off the shelf. They'll sell it without a doctor's prescription. For law enforcement, they're limited by budget also, so there's not enough people to police the situation. And then you add to it that there's a lack of really good technologies to detect counterfeit medicines. There's 41 different companies making instruments out there now, and the problem is that they don't give you quantitative results. They don't measure how diluted the drug is or how degraded the drug is. Some of them can give you a yes/no answer. They don't give you enough information so that the doctor or the pharmacist can really deal it. And then there's other issues. They're poorly manufactured. When you bring equipment into sub-Saharan Africa, you're dealing often with intense humidity and heat. And a lot of the instruments that get designed are designed in places of different climate. And when they get there, they just can't hold up in that environment. Sometimes the instruments that are sold there are out of date and expired. Sometimes the instruments are degraded. The batteries are degraded within the instrument. And so none of these instruments are capable of really any type of field-based testing of the drugs. And it's, again, many of them are very expensive. They require big libraries to work with. Some of them you can't interface to get into the law enforcement or the healthcare system. And so there's all sorts of problems with these instruments. So this is PharmaChk, developed at Boston University. It's affordable. We try and keep the price as low as possible. It's a few $100s. It does the American Pharmaceutical Index quantification and kinetic fingerprinting. So like other devices, PharmaChk offers portability. It runs on batteries, rapid results. It's very, very simple to use. You don't have to be a med tech or a pharmacist to know how to run one. The results on this are very highly accurate and they repeat. It's a test that'll hold up in that environment. It does quantitative. It gives you the exact number of particles that you're looking for of the formulation that you're using, the percent of the drug in the pill. It's cartridge based. One cartridge can do up to 10 tests. Reporting results, it's got an interface that will go in anything digitally, computer, a laptop, a phone, a cell phone. You can transmit the results. And the tests are under $5 a test, so it assures that the impact is there. And this is a product that we're now getting to a point where the final prototype is almost done. We're looking for a diagnostic partner would do the final engineering, take it through whatever the regulatory process is going to be, and manufacture and market the product. If the Rotary can help us with contacts that might be interested in doing this, we'd be greatly appreciative. New project that I just got handed. As I said before, there's 5 different species of mosquitoes. The one native to Africa is called falciparum. The one native to Asia is called vivax. There's a glucose disorder that affects about 40% of the African population. It's called G6PD. If the patient has G6PD and they take a vivax medicine, it can cause blood clots. And the blood clots will cause heart attacks, strokes, and even death. And so it's important to track vivax as we go through here. And we want to strengthen the research capacity in countries. And so we're developing a network of laboratory expertise to track vivax, help strengthen the programs in the hospitals. Merck is going to be engaged in this throughout 15 countries. So the situation is all through sub-Saharan Africa. Initially, the vivax influx has been small, but we're seeing it grow more and more. They've done an epidemiology study in Botswana and Zambia. I was recently in Luanda, Angola, at the malaria lab there, the country malaria lab, and they said that they're seeing more and more mosquitoes. And a lot of this is due to immigration from Asia into Africa. And so we have some expertise. Merck funded 3 PhD scholarships that have been granted to do this work. And we want to set up a network throughout Africa to track the growth of P. vivax and make the countries aware so that they can prepare for this in the future. There's a lot of work to do in this area. One of the things that hurts is that we don't have very good tests for G6PD out there. It's a very difficult test to develop. We worked on it and failed for 3 years at one point, but everybody is committed to tracking vivax, educating the healthcare systems so that when it shows up with the patients, that they'll know how to deal with it. This is my take-home message. We've got 3 things going on. We're teaching microscopy to help diagnose malaria and strengthen healthcare systems. We want to fight counterfeit drugs that are harming the most vulnerable populations, including the poor, the sick, children, and adults. And PharmaChk is being developed to do this. The spread of P. vivax malaria will cause complications with G6PD patients throughout Africa, and it'll affect healthcare delivery. It's important that we begin to monitor the spread of P. vivax. So your help is desired to support all 3 projects, and if you're interested in getting involved or want to participate in any one of these 3 projects, please feel more welcome to contact me. The last slide is how to get a hold of me. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, my office in Switzerland. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to thank the Rotary. I want to thank Merck. I want to thank Infanta. I want to thank the Ghana FDA, Ghana Health Services, and the Noguchi Memorial Medical Research Center.
Thank you, Jim, for the informative presentation. We're now going to take some questions from our audience. We do have a question.
Hi, my name is Ariel as well. My question was about the counterfeit drugs you were referencing. Is this specifically only about intentionally fake drugs or also low efficacy generic drugs sold to these countries?
It's a good question. It's actually three different things. There's completely placebo counterfeit drugs that are being made. When you look at the wrappers and the packaging and everything else, the wording, it's almost identical to the real thing. Law enforcement agents have a ton of these examples. Second one is they'll take the good drug that's been developed and they'll divide it and combine it with another compound and dilute it down. And that's what I mean by diluted drugs. And then the third piece is degraded. They'll take something that's out of date, repackage it, it's degraded, it's ineffective, nobody tests it, and it gets out in the field and it doesn't work, even though at one time it was the original compound. Some of the drugs that are out there, because of ineffective packaging or a lack of refrigeration, by the time they get to remote places, they're completely exhausted. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Jim. We do have a few other questions. One, I'm going to read this one from the chat box. It says, how will this be sustainable in the future in terms of having healthcare professionals trained in reference to retention of those trained workers who will initially leave? Who's going to monitor on at least an annual basis to determine if there is a trained healthcare worker at each station where there is a Merck microscope?
Well, essentially what's going to happen is they'll come out of training. The training is one-on-one for 2 weeks. And then each graduate will become an intern at the Ghana Health Services. And they'll go either to a major hospital or to a major clinic. And they'll be monitored over a month or two by a Ghana Health Services trained medical technologist that has been using microscopy for years, and this is a lot of experience. Once it's determined that the new trainee is competent and ready to go, then they'll be assigned into a district. Their work will be monitored by laboratory managers and also by the resident pathologist. They'll be taught that how to screen patients. At the end of the day, though, big medical decisions will always be sent over to the pathologist for a complete review. But at least now we have a front line. We're teaching people new skills. And as they learn these skills, they'll pass it on to other medical technologists as we go. So that's the sustaining within the healthcare system. The other sustaining thing is Merck's follow-up. Merck will have representation on the ground that will be positioning stains and slides and other laboratory products into these laboratories. The money from the sale of the stains and slides will use part of the profit to continue training in other areas. The microscope is a great thing to train with because not only can they do malaria, but they can do schistosomiasis, which is another parasite. They can look at leukemia, which is early signs of leukemia. They'll be taught this. And we plan to bring the students back every year or so to expand their knowledge about microscopy and give them other uses for the microscopes. And this is a long-term plan once we get the microscopes in there. Did I answer your question?
I believe you did. There's another question, Jim. It's relating to last mile care. The question is about, would there eventually be mobile clinics equipped with microscopy devices and trained healthcare workers to get to the rural areas in Ghana? And is this something that the partner Infanta might partner with?
Whoever sent this question in really knows Africa, because the fastest segment growing within the large hospitals and healthcare systems is ambulatory laboratories, because these labs are built either in a van or an old school bus or some sort of Jeep. There's limited space available. And so you need an instrument that can do multiple things. And the beauty of the microscope is that it is portable and it can work in these ambulatory labs. And if you have a good technologist there, you'll know what you're dealing with when you get to the village. The other thing I wanted to say, and it's important, is the microscopes that we're using is made by an Indian company called Radical Scientific. Radical Scientific has, one of the reasons we chose them, when I looked at a lot of microscopes, is the They're a very affordable scope. But the other piece of it is they work on batteries as well as on electricity. So we can take it out in the field and work in the field just as easy as in the hospital.
Thanks for answering that question. We have time for 2 more questions. The next question is about healthcare professionals and/or hospitals or clinics being trained about what actions should be taken based on the results of the microscopy for each patient.
When they do a blood cell count using a microscope, they'll look at up to 1,000 cells, and they'll count the cells with a cell counter that is part of the microscopy station that we're sending them. And so they'll know how many white cells, how many red cells, how many platelets, and they can get a good estimate. But the other thing they're going to be trained to do is to look for abnormal cells. So should the count be off? Should we have a low count or too high a count of lymphocytes, or we have a very low count of red cells? Right away, there'll be what we call panic values, and they'll be taped next to the scope in the lab. And so anything that goes out of range, that means that that sample really needs to be sent to a trained pathologist for him to review. And that's what the goal of this is to isolate the really sick people that need the most help and escalate the delivery.
Great. Well, we're towards the end of our webinar, and there's one more question. And this question is about how can we support your work?
You through your connections on the ground that can help with fundraising, but also your connections with the governments and the countries that we go into, your connections with the universities where they would teach the microscopy. You're working, I would never have known about Pilgrim hadn't been for the Rotary. The other piece of it is you do a lot of trips into Africa. It would make a huge impact on the people doing the program if the Rotary came by and investigated and took a look at what they were doing, building relationships and having long-term connections makes expanding these projects easier, adding new projects easier. We can do more as a team together to combat malaria than we could working alone. One of the things I loved about joining the RMP was I immediately saw a ton of synergies. And I really think we could work closer together and make a bigger impact.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's been a real pleasure to have you with this webinar today. I also just want to encourage our audience, want to seek any further information about Rotary and Malaria Partners, or if you want to learn more about the most recent trends in the battle against malaria, please visit our website at www.rotarianmalariapartners.org. And there you'll also find information about our small grant project, including the project in Ghana. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope everyone found it very informative, and we hope to see you again at a future webinar.